And it's always a pleasure to always a pleasure to be here with everybody in our monthly Resonance Academy faculty Q&A. We are in November already. My goodness, 2021 is just flying by. And perhaps that's a good thing. These are pretty wild times we're in, and we're in a massive transitional shift time. I think it's pretty safe to say that we would all agree something's going on many levels. And you know, for our part here in Resonance Science Foundation and Resonance Academy, we are doing all we can to bring awareness and education and support to the development of unified physics, unified science, and the importance of that for our world at this time, which, as many of you have been here for many years, you have an understanding of the foundation of what the unified physics theory is that Nassim Haramein, along with William Brown and Nas Urdaneta, who are here with us today, and Olivier and a number of other researchers and engineers have been developing over the years. And with Jamie Janover, who's here today, who's been out speaking this up for many years, many years. If you don't know Jamie, he is a fabulous musician and a great presenter, and has been presenting Nassim Haramein's unified physics theory. I don't know how many years now, Jamie, but I think you were the first, and have been doing it faithfully for so many years, doing a great job of that. So,
thanks, Marshall. Appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you. And I see Adam made it on, Adam Apollo, another member of our faculty. And Adam and I were co-creators of the Resonance Academy going back to 2014, 2015 when we launched, and have been immersing in this understanding of the physics and the science and the importance of it for many years as well. And so we love to share in this time together with each other, and as well with everybody that's here on Zoom. And for those who are streaming in on Facebook or other live platforms, we welcome you and invite you to become a member of the Resonance Academy. And when you do that, you can join us here on Zoom, and you can post questions that you may want us to address related to the unified physics theory. And kind of, we're pretty open to many topics of discussion here. And the beauty of it is that the unified physics theory really, it's unified, it's all encompassing. It's a foundational understanding that can be brought into consideration in pretty much any field that we want to explore. And it's always a great inquiry and a great little test of our ways of having that consideration be put to the test, and see what we might come up with and expand our understanding together. So we appreciate our Academy members and your support every month at the $5 level a month, or $10 or $20, whatever suits your budget. We welcome it all, and it's what makes this possible. You know, this is the offering we are doing here is not funded by any big other sponsor. We do also welcome large donors for the Resonance Science Foundation, because we are a nonprofit organization. And that really helps us to continue the research work and the educational work that we do. So we welcome it all, but we really appreciate our members being here. So please join us if you're tuning in and you're not a member. It really is helpful for all of us. So let's have a little quick round of hellos from everybody that's in here in the faculty today. We can start with Ines, who is, I believe, in Mexico City. Is that right, Ines?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Hi. Yes, I'm in Mexico City. That's right.
Yeah. And Ines is one of the core research team. And what's your specialty, or your field of study? How would you describe, what your area is? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's okay. So I'm a chemist and I have a PhD in physics. So I did first my studies in chemistry. I don't know how you call them in English, like my undergraduate studies in chemistry.
Mhm.
Then I did a PhD. I did first a master degree in physical chemistry, and then I did a PhD in physics. And it's all along it's always been the same, let's say, line of research, which is light matter interaction at the atomic and molecular scale. Some very different perspectives. From the perspective of chemistry and physics, I had been working on that topic, which is, and nanotechnology at the end. So I made PhD in molecular wires coupled to time-dependent electric fields. So that's kind of simulating all theoretical. Except for my thesis in my undergraduate student, which was, let's say, experimental, which was with lasers, and it's in a laboratory of quantum optics in Venezuela. It was called Instituto Venezolano de Investigaciones Científicas in Venezuela, it's a IVIC. And under the supervision of Aristides Marcano, I was doing experiments with fluorescent compounds like rhodamine. That means 101. And so we were calculating and measuring the absorption saturation and the coefficient of fluorescence of this compound. So that's one of the things I started with experimental, but then I very rapidly switched to theory, say. And so then after that, all I have done, it's like most of it analytical modeling of systems, of physical chemical systems, analytical modeling. And so that's ending with my PhD, which was about electronic transport or molecular assisted by laser fields. But that's, and then, yeah, that was
Fantastic.
my, so I always work in that domain of light matter interaction.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Summary of the great study you've done, and then to know that you bring that background into this study as well, and deepening the research and being able to correlate it into the current paradigms of chemistry and physics, and then to see how we could bridge into the unified physics theory and bring it into unity.
Well, you know that I'm kind of sad or worried, because now that the holographic theory is coming and it's with the next paper to be achieved, it's like it's suddenly going to explain the visions of quantum physics and relativity. And so at some point, like, because all my work before that, I'm already working in the holographic model, but before that I was quantum physics. Everything that I did was quantum physics. So it's gonna be like kind of away. I have the feeling that because of this generalized holographic models and the holographic theory is gonna go and
like, just kind of brush it aside, huh?
That's right.
Yeah, I have a feeling. Well, it's not about, I mean, probably it won't be that fast, but I have the impression that it will be a huge evolution for quantum physics. And so, yeah, but because you go into a deeper layer of understanding of quantum physics. So explaining the emergence of quantum physics and relativity is something that's very, of course, amazing. So
yes,
I cannot say
and I might add,
news, but many people will feel like, oh.
Nez did a great job doing module 7 in the free unified science course. She managed to summarize the last 4 or 5 papers that came out of Nassim Haramein and research team and put it all into one module. So if you haven't done the unified science course, or if you've done it and haven't done module 7 yet, check out Inez's great work on summarizing all that physics. And upcoming after that, of course, is going to be module 8, which will be about the new paper that is yet to be published, but is incredible. I got to see some of the equations recently, and it really is, tying together how all the forces relate to each other and why they are that. And it explains stuff as fundamental as why the phi ratio is the phi ratio. So it's very profound implications for this new paper. Yeah,
great. Yeah. Thanks, Jamie. Jamie, you just want to give us a little, thanks for that, Ines. I just was introducing you a little bit, Jamie, and Jamie has also been helping out with the Resonance Science Foundation along with presenting in so many ways. And when you see our posts about what's happening and also many varied things that Jamie, he's the one that's putting so much out there, and it just helps us tremendously to have that outreach going on. So again, thank you, Jamie, for all that too.
Yeah, thanks. It's an honor to be able to help be a conduit for such fundamental resonant information. It's so foundational that if you really align yourself with understanding the dynamics and the structure of the thing that you're in, which is space itself, then stuff starts to flow and synchronicities happen. So it's great on a personal level just to be part of that process of sharing the information, and then also seeing the effects and talking to a lot of people that, you know, have had positive reactions to tuning into fundamental things about the universe. It makes a lot of sense, and it's been affirmed so many times for so many years that I just know it's just something I do. It's like music. It's like, you know, relationships. It's like love. It's like anything that you are doing on a regular basis. It's that feedback loop of information. So it's the most amazing information I'm aware of. So good thing for us to be all doing. So I encourage everybody basically to, like, when you find something that really strikes you and gives you what I like to call truth bumps, otherwise known as goosebumps, there's a reason why that happens. And then, like, maybe share that, because there's folks that you know that are also going to get that reaction. You can create a cascade domino effect from a very small action. So that's my tidbit of the day.
Love it. So true. Thank you, Jamie. Adam, welcome to you too. I think we have you for an hour and William for an hour today. So we'll want to get to some questions actually pretty soon, but always good to have you here, man. How's it going?
Thanks so much, Marshall. It's always good to be here and love this crew, and glad I could jump on today. I'm headed over to Sedona this evening, and we'll be speaking at a health sovereignty conference, particularly on the nature of individual event horizons and what it means to be an individual being inside of a universe in which you're interconnected with everything else. And so it's going to be fun. We'll be a little bit of physics and a little bit of law and science of language and how we structure our perception of everything through the language we choose and the agreements we choose to make with each other. And it's really foundational stuff, you know, to the whole fabric of our communion with humanity and each other. And I think that, you know, my personal journey in unified physics has revealed to me that there are often very, very simple foundations for all of the complexity that we witness in the universe. And I can say that's probably one of my biggest takeaways that I've applied to every part of my life is realizing when you really get the simplest mechanics, the fundamental geometry, the heart of the interaction, you know, which is really the push and the pull, the tensegrity, you know, that we're in when we're in connection with and relationship with and in independence with things, you can then start to see how that mechanic then applies to everything else. And it's a really powerful lens to use as we approach questions in all kinds of areas of our lives. You know, what are the most simple fundamentals and what matters the most? And you get down to that and the rest of the puzzle, you know, puts itself together. So really happy to be here with you guys, and excited to see some of you in Sedona, I know, that are coming to the event, and then I hope to meet up with you. And yeah, let's rock some questions today.
Awesome. That's great, Adam. I love that you, first of all, that you're doing what you're doing there. That's so important in these times to address exactly that fundamental understanding about the nature of who we are and how the universe is really ultimately operating. So that's great. And your description of that underlying simplicity from which the complexity arises as you know, that which can inform all these inquiries and conversations, because there's a commonality in all of that. And so I know that's what you do, and you bridge it in very beautifully as you articulate it. So
Thanks,
thank you.
Marshall.
Yeah. So we'll say hi to William real quick, and then we'll jump into some questions and get you guys talking a bit more about these inquiries. So William, I think you were only here for an hour as well. So
Well, actually, I had some good news this morning. I had a bit of a schedule change and my schedule opened up. So actually, I'm going to be on for the full 2 hours.
cool.
So yeah,
All right. Okay, great.
I was pretty happy by that kind of serendipitous development.
Excellent. That's
You
good
know,
to hear.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you all. And, I always just thoroughly enjoy our conversations here. So I'm happy when things work out that I can participate fully.
Great.
Yeah, definitely
Awesome.
looking forward to getting into some questions.
Yeah.
One thing that's kind of interesting that I just might mention before we jump into it. So one of the things that I've been reading about the last couple of days was this interesting study that was put out by a research team at the University of Surrey. And this is actually it's a astrophysicist and a biophysicist, and it's actually a pair of researchers that we have published a review on previously regarding the morphogenic field. And basically, they show the mathematics how there really is a morphogenic field, and this pair of researchers use this property they come up with called holographic info entropy. And they've done some really interesting things like showing the unification between the same geometry of the DNA as a double logarithmic spiral and galaxies. And actually, Robert Grant just published a paper on that same thing. Really interesting seeing the geometry coming into the fore here. But they just published a paper on identifying a fundamental link between the size of atomic nuclei and black hole thermodynamic principles. And it's just really interesting because, anytime in science where you have a group of researchers kind of independently coming up with the same discoveries and conclusions that you're coming up with, that's corroboration. That's actually a great thing. And sure enough, these guys are using black hole thermodynamics with a geometrical approach and information theory to predict and describe, in this case, the size of the helium mass radius and charge radius. And they do that based on a fundamental scale for the proton. I don't know if this sounds familiar. Very similar to work that like Inez and Dr. Olivier and Nassim have done. And it's another great example of where these researchers are using first principles to output physical values of our universe. In this case, the size of the helium mass radius, charge radius, and its isotopes as well. That's the goal, because right now in modern physics, nuclear physicists, particle physicists have not been doing such a great job with these fundamental issues like the size of the proton, the size of atoms. There's the proton radius puzzle, which is an example of where Nassim has used first principles, black hole thermodynamics, geometry, information theory to output the specific size of the proton. And so here is an example of another research team applying very, very similar methods to output from first principles some of these fundamental properties. So it's a really interesting development to see that there's this convergence that is occurring, and whether or not they are familiar with the work in Nassim or this was done totally independently, I think it's a great thing to see that other research teams are figuring this out.
Yeah, that's super exciting to hear that. Like you said, it's the corroboration, and I think for our part, we feel pretty confident we're going to see more and more of that corroboration coming,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's a sensible model that
Yeah.
it's not hard to wrap your head around. Once you do, then a lot will start to become revealed through these various researches and the different ways that we can look at the same thing, come up with the same conclusion. So that's really exciting to hear.
And it's kind of even going back to what Adam was saying. This is beautiful when the results are being outputted with simplicity. I mean, you're using geometry,
Right.
and it's like seeing that the universe is built on very simplistic principles, understandable foundations.
Yep, which just makes sense that it would be.
Yeah.
It really does not have to be complex.
Yeah.
Let's jump into some questions. Thanks for that, William. Adam, since we only have you for about another 35 minutes or so, if you spotted a question you want to jump in on, let's go for that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of there's a little kind of trio of questions that all are pointing to the same thing in my perception, and I would be happy to kind of address those. Last month, I spoke a lot on the nature of the proton geometry and the aspects of the relationship of that with the double torus model and some of the foundations of forces, etc. So I'm going to share a little bit on that today as well, because it's a good review and it's really foundational. It's one of those most simple, most core things in terms of understanding the proton. And so Oriana asked me as a follow-up, is it that the spin is perpetually moving and the counterspin is slowing the movement back to the still point of the singularity? So first of all, it's not necessarily that the double torus format and structure means that one hemisphere of that object is spinning one direction while the other hemisphere is spinning the other direction. The counterspin hypothesis within the double torus may not apply to the proton, while the proton itself still obeys and operates with some of the same fundamental geometric laws as that double torus understanding that we've seen rendered many times. And the reason for that comes down to the tensegrity of space-time. It comes down to, you're talking about a highly energetic lattice with extreme levels of vibrational repulsion from each other with attraction to each other within the PSU that are overlapping. And when you're talking about a proton, you're talking about something that's been built literally layer over layer after layer after layer after layer, all in as highly equilibrium states as possible, with extremely high tension around vortex points where the curvature is mediated, the pentagonal vortices. And so in the way that I describe the quantum geometry of the proton, which also was further verified by Nassim's recent work, saying that it looks like, there is high viscosity to space-time, meaning it's highly crystalline, is that this structure, needs to have some way of holding itself together. And if you look at that, it wouldn't make sense if the entire structure was shearing at its equator, right? It's spinning at the speed of light at its equator at the actual horizon. In other words, at the point where the boundary condition of the proton meets the surrounding space-time. But for the entire top to be going one way while the entire bottoms to be going the other way means that the shearing would be going all the way through the entire middle of the proton, breaking that space-time tensegrity. And so in essence, you'd really have two elements, and they would be much more independent, much less likely to be holding themselves together, let's just say. But the double torus phenomena still exists within that model, because even if you have a one spherical object moving and spinning in one direction, and you've got vortices going in through the poles, you also have a plane where there's an exchange going back out in the system. And that plane where the exchange is going out, the force exchange is happening, is likely that equator. It's literally that spot along that center horizon, where if there's new PSU being generated or whatever, where are they probably leaving the proton? Most likely it's going to be at the point where the proton is spinning at the speed of light, which is right at that equator horizon point. So I wanted to explain my thinking around that a little bit further, because the idea of the counter spinning horizons sort of adds some significant problems and difficulty when we're looking at a high tensegrity crystalline-like structure to spacetime. And so that also answers Richard Herrenberg's question: what happens to the PSUs in the double vortex model of the proton, to an extent, but there's also some additional information that we need to look at to understand what's going on with each of those space-time units, both inside the proton and in its relationship to outside the proton. And to do that, it helps to go back to another piece that is a recent discovery that I made last year, which was looking at the reality that the number of PSU in the volume of the proton, the 10 to the 60th, also is the same order of magnitude of the number of Planck seconds in the lifetime of our universe. So is that a coincidence that a proton has the same number of oscillations in its volume as we have Planck seconds in the lifetime of the entire universe? I don't think so. I think this is another direct proof that ties the proton to the holographic fractal universe. In other words, that the proton is growing 1 PSU every Planck second, meaning that it has a direct tie to the universal growth and expansion and et cetera. And so the size of the proton is always going to be directly in relationship to the size and or literally age of the entire universe itself. And that also points to some other cool stuff, like the idea that the proton is storing information of the universe and is acting as a hard drive in each one of those oscillations. And so if the proton is growing literally at a PSU per Planck second, which, you know, seems like it could be a lot, but actually when you're dealing with the range of 10 to the 60th, I mean, the level of growth of that proton is something that in all of humanity, we would probably not even notice the change in size very much, right? It's minuscule in comparison to the lifetime of the universe to witness that growth. But that being said, it means that if there is both input of PSU into the proton and output of PSU from the proton, the net result value of the exchange of the proton with oscillations in the surrounding spacetime is always going to be net positive for the proton, meaning that the proton is literally always going to have a little bit more PSU than it did before, right? And that doesn't stop its ability to do the exchange. It just means that it's integrating into its system information in some way that's allowing it to continue to store and grow and build and develop. So that's a few insights into those questions. And I don't think I'll take it further from there, just to allow plenty of time to hear everybody else's questions.
That's great. I didn't track who all you were answering questions for, but if you want to.
It's Oriana and Richard Herrenberg.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, great. So thank you for that. That was super insightful. What came to my mind actually was when you're talking about you can have the single rotation of the spherical entity with the double torus dynamic still present. And that's true with what's happening on the Earth and other planets, where you have a single spherical entity moving in one direction, and you have a magnetic field that is surrounding and interpenetrating as a double torus. So it doesn't have to be that the PSUs themselves are shearing, but it could shearing and creating that double torus, but actually just the overall collective coherent effect of a magnetic field or a charge or something may be where that dynamic is being exhibited.
Yeah, certainly. And also, just based on spin and drag and looking at the newest models of the electron, where we're talking about the proton actually pulling the field of space-time, and the field of space-time being that motion being what we call the electron. It's the actual movement of that PSU field around it. Then in tons of molecular formations, you get very double torus-like structures where you do have counterspin going on. And that's that, as you start to really look at the different kinds of shapes to the electron orbitals, you start to see the different ways that the spinning of these protons in polar alignment or in hemispheric alignment or equatorial alignment are actually causing different torsion fields at different shapes around them. And so, yeah, you totally can have counter rotating like operations as you add protons together in molecules.
Great.
I
Thanks, Adam.
have a question. Can you see, because I have all of you frozen. Is it my case as well?
You're not frozen to me.
You're coming through.
No,
and
I'm not frozen.
So far.
So far, it's okay.
You're coming through. It's a
Weird
little
because
choppy.
I have you all frozen.
Yeah, your
so I don't know if
signal
I
is-
was in another dimension.
Your signal is a
Okay.
little choppy. It's definitely the video on your end and the voice is just a little choppy, but it is coming through pretty well overall. So
Oh, okay. Oh, well, I just wanted to add, just interrupt me if I'm not being understandable, that I think the phase transition going on between what the PSU is doing, which is this double torus dynamics, because it's a field on its own, and so that's a charge. That's a separate. That's what we call that a polarization, a polarizability of space-time. You have this polarizability, but at some point that's charge, what we would say charge polarization and all of that. But at some point it will become mass. So there's this change, phase transition where charge then passes to be mass. When it's mass, the massive object, then of course you cannot have that sharing of because you would see, as you were saying, Marshall, you would have the Earth going counterclockwise on the other hemisphere. So the physicality, the mass is having just one direction, one spin, but the fields which within are having this double torus dynamics. So but there's a phase transition that will be very well explained in Model 8 and in the next paper that it's about to come out, where you will see why there's this. We still don't understand how, because at the very, very small scale, everything is polarizations, polarizabilities, all this separation of charge in positive and negatives, all of that. So there's always this polarization of space, and it's not only a polarization, it's a quadrupole. In order for that to be real physically, the topology that corresponds is it's not a polarization, but a quadrupole. It's got to have at least the quadrupole regime for that to happen. But that's a topological problem. But then when you have that, so you have these polarizations, quadrupoles happen all around. But when does it become mass? Because at the quantum level, we have everything is electromagnetic, right? It's charges and magnetic fields. But at our scale, it's mass. I don't see charges here. I don't feel electrostatic charges. I just feel the gravity, the mass of it. So it's obvious that there's some kind of phase transition in which this is happening. And in that phase transition, what we call mass, which is the inertial mass. What we call mass is the inertial mass, which is the information that can come out of the horizon, which is delimiting this region of space, no? And at that point, that mass, it's like a planet or like a proton is spinning in just one direction. I'm not sure. I'm not so sure for the proton. I'm not sure, but for the Earth, it's For the Earth is pretty clear. I probably for the proton too, because there's a lot of it's mass. It's starting what we call mass. It's starting at the kernel, which is 64 PSU. So from that point on, it is probable that you will have only one thing spinning like a ball. You know, it's probable that phase transition happening there, and after that, then we have all the. What do you think, Adam, about that?
Yeah. I would just, from my perspective, the phase transition is actually just the collective experience of a group of PSU in tensegrity that are now in curvature and in comotion, which is exactly why the proton is that first step in that transition you're talking about, because now all the PSU are operating as a single unified element. And because of their curvature, it's literally their curvature that we then define space-time curvature, which then defines gravity, which then defines mass, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like it is the, the main phase transition to curvature and thus to mass, which is why I would hold that the proton, does not counter rotate at the equator.
There's a little bit, there's one step before, which is the kernel of mass, which is this 64 PSU rotating. That's the kernel for mass. That this is the model 8 would explain with the paper, is that's what we call the Planck mass. The Planck mass, it's got a double. This is really hard to explain, but it's got like a double meaning. So it's the Planck mass of each PSU. But since it's in a bosonic state, you will have not only one, you can have up to 64, and it's still the same mass, because it's in a bosonic state. So then once that's when the fermionicity starts after the 64, let's say, when it starts to be when let's say when entropy starts, let's say when it's still bosonic, it's behaving like a superfluid, like a super solid, like a supercrystal. Once you get out of that sphere, then there's all these effects happening, which is screening and all of that, and so the first stage is the proton, but before that there's this stage of the Planck hole, of the Planck mass black hole. The Planck mass black hole is the stage before that.
And
then
is that the 64 structure you're talking about? And are you saying that 64 is that 64 structure completely tetrahedral? In other words, are all the PSU within it totally in equal distance and equal relationship to each other?
Yeah.
So that's why there is no additional mass, because there is no external relationship between that object and any surrounding field. If it's completely in equilibrium, it's just existing in equilibrium, which is where I would actually counter the sense that it's operating like a black hole, because every other black hole that we witness, including the proton, creates curvature. In other words, is generating some experience of mass and gravity. But it's obviously in that sense, it's perhaps a semantic, question, because the real philosophical inquiry at that point is each PSU a black hole, right? Is each PSU a singularity, or is there something about the aggregation of PSU that generates a singularity in different states? I'm just not sure that PSU in equilibrium, like the 64 structure, generate that kind of state, right? It's more kind of like the neutrality state of space-time is the way that I look at it.
I think there's a possible difference in how that particular equilibrium state is relative to the one I think, Adam, you're referring to. That's the isotropic vector matrix, vector equilibrium, where it's in that zero phase equilibrium state. Now, when you take that vector equilibrium shape and you literally then take each tetrahedron and you polarize each one of those to, there are 8 of those, and you do the star tetrahedron, polarization of each of those 8, you get to 64 tetrahedron structure.
Mhm.
So it's now a polarized IBM, and it's no longer the same IBM geometry. It's not in that 0-point geometry anymore. It's now a polarized version of it, you could say. And that's my understanding. That's when the first iteration of that mass comes in, because it's no longer in that state.
Yeah.
Because it's a really good point you're making there.
Right. So you're saying the fundamental difference, and this is for the students for the translation here, is that in the state where all the PSU are simply in tetrahedral arrangement, there is can you say it's not polarized? I don't know. I'm gonna like hold that one and put that one aside for a second, but I'll say that it is at least in total tetrahedral, almost like transparent space-time. That's what we call like neutral space-time with no fields, nothing going on. It's just passing fields. But you're saying that there's, in the 64 sense, then is it that each PSU has the double that's the other orientation? Is it that there are additional PSU that are creating the polarization? I want to get down to the mechanics of that, because I've heard the model a few times and I've read it, but I want to understand how the PSU mechanic goes from being non-polarized to polarized, and what is the transition that's occurring there? Because if we can get that, then you can see the two directions you're talking about. Okay.
Maybe it's because of, as I understand it, all the PSUs are always in this double spin dynamics, and they are always in polarized, let's say. But
That's
each of
my
them.
sense too. Yeah.
Sure.
And of course, if you have them, so there's a region space which it acts like a solid, a super solid, and then it becomes a superfluid. When there's movement starting, when there's asymmetry starting to happen, then you have a superfluid. And then at some point, this in this region, so the supersolid, it's like, let's say, it's like a Bose-Einstein condensate. It's like everything behaves like one, like oneness. Let's say everything is behaving. So you have it's a perfect superposition of quantum states. But once you go further into this, which, let's say, event horizon, you have a combination of both Bose-Einstein and Fermi-Dirac statistics. Which is basically meaning that the coherence is being lost. This part is perfect coherence, and in this second region, coherence is starting to get into trouble, let's say, because you're getting farther away from the center of rotation, okay, and you're much more used and all of that. So what I'm understanding is that the kernel of mass, which is 64 tetrahedron grid, is that's where the mass zero starts. This is the zero reference for mass. And beyond that, or outside of that, mass starts, what we understand as mass starts. And so that's a phase transition happening in that point. And well, that's that's how I understand it. And yeah, so it doesn't mean that
a phase transition from a Bose state to a Fermi state, or a Bose-Fermi mixed state.
Yeah, a phase transition from Bose to a mix of Bose-Fermi state, and then it be all Fermi. So that's, which is our in our experience, this is all entropy and all of that, straining everywhere and entropy. But at the base, it's just so this is just phase transitions going on, and that's one. And one of the most important transitions here is the phase transition from inside to outside. When does it happen that you have the black hole electron or proton, sorry, and then it becomes, the other way around, like this orange that you just, so it was first in this state, and then it comes to the stage. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, the inside, like, how do you define the event horizon's position, right? That's the question.
Yeah.
And I mean, my answer to that is very simple, which is just that if the proton is rotating, the point in the radius from the distance of the center, at which point the PSU are now going at the speed of light in relationship to the surrounding space-time, then at that point, there is a natural phase transition that occurs, because at that light speed, there's a massive mass, shift that occurs, because there's no longer the application of the mass of the curvature of the system on the surrounding space, because at light, you're crossing that boundary. And whereas the rest of the structure in the sphere is going to be going slower. So you're still going to have tension and torsion, meaning it's still going to be pulling the surrounding space, and you're going to have all of that effect. Yeah, it's really great. I'd love to, meet up with you guys and unpack a little bit more about what it is about the 64 PSU unit that is causing this transition from a Bose to Fermi state, or is establishing that is creating a sense of mass. And I'm curious about what parallels in experimentation we found that would correlate that there is an object at that size that is giving some kind of mass experience, because as far as I've been able to tell, in terms of the subproton, objects that we've witnessed, we haven't seen anything quite that coherent, that at least, I've seen in experimentation so far. So it sounds like great work, and I want to dig in with it further with you guys.
Meant for me, what the 60 means for me, that this is about a perfect state of equilibrium where all information is, inside can be transferred to surface, go outside, because it's because usually after that you will have much more PSUs inside than on the surface, meaning there's much more information than on the surface. But the 64 means that there's 64 PSUs in the inside in balance with the 64 PSU on the surface. So that's why that's the kernel. That perfect 64 in the sense that it's got 64 in the surface and 64 in the volume. So that's why it is the kernel. It's just so eta and R equal
equilibrium.
And so that's the place and that's the blank mass black hole condition, which is too
Beautiful.
So I would say that's a singularity condition, meaning that the whole structure is in singularity, meaning that it's all operating as a single structure. Right. But I wouldn't say black hole condition, because at that point you're talking about the effect of the singularity as a mass on surrounding space. I just separate those two terms because the structures being in a singularity state operating as one, that makes sense to me. That part I get, that part I'm 100% on board with. Absolutely get it. The surface area and volume being in equilibrium is one of the most powerful, sort of mental exercises within this whole game, and it's really powerful. And there's also the as we're calling a phase transition to mass, where we're talking about the effect of a object, down at the Planck scale, having a mass effect on others, which we can only describe the mass through the gravitational field created by that mass, meaning through the curvature in space-time that it generates. So unless we define that space-time curvature geometry, or how that 64 is creating curvature, then I will say that at this point, I don't see the equation to the gravitational.
That's side. When it starts. That's when it starts.
It starts.
That's the point start, the ref for zero. That's the reference point.
That's really the transitional.
That's it's just the point of transition.
A phase, transitional phase.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great
that's
insight.
And that's where, for the first transition, then there will have others, but one of the importance. And after that, you'll have the following ones, which will be explained in the paper. So
sounds like great work, you guys. I'm looking
Great,
forward
really
to checking
great.
it out.
Adam, I know we only have a few more minutes with you. Did you see another question you want to jump in on now?
Gosh, man,
You
I'm
probably
taking
haven't
up
had
all
a
the
chance to
bandwidth
look.
here.
Well, that's okay. We have Ines and William for a while afterwards. So
All right.
I'll have to tap your insights.
Yeah. I mean, I'll respond to Zed's question because it's related to all of this too, which is, oops, I accidentally clicked one of Nadi's, which is basically, you know, what is electricity and magnetism, because it rolls right off of everything we're talking about. And the electricity is, from a unified physics perspective, what we start to get insights about is that as the proton's spinning and it's pulling the surrounding space-time field, the movement of co-moving PSU in the space-time field is what we then designate or pick up as electrical charge. In other words, we define that co-moving field as the electron field. And in certain conditions and in certain ways, when PSU are co-moving through a structure in a way, then we can define what we call electrons. In other words, we sort of identify positions for the center of charge in a co-moving field of PSU. And the way those PSU move follows certain kind of geometric principles, because you have to remember that they're all moving in a space of high tensegrity with a bunch of others. And so that the principles for movement of the waves within the co-moving PSU basically follow some of the map that we see as we look into, you know, the standard electromagnetism studies that we have in our days now, where you have an electrical wave and a magnetic wave. But it gets a little bit more interesting than that, because you start to see that in fact, you know, everything everywhere, it's all PSU, it's all structures of PSU. And then you have things that are PSU forming protons, and protons together are forming molecular structures. And those molecular structures do things like, you know, chain together to create what we call a metal wire, right? And so a metal wire, you know, you could think of as a pipeline of a bunch of molecules all structured together and in a semi-crystalline like format, because it's metal, right? And so they have it takes a lot to heat it up to actually melt it. They're highly crystalline together. And then the question is, well, what is actually happening in the movement of inside that wire? Well, when you realize that all the protons in there are already pulling space-time around them, then what you start to see is that you've got this like fluid field that's going on around all the protons in the chain. And the PSU don't have to just flow around one proton. They can actually flow co-moving all together down the entire pipe. In other words, where the PSU are actually just traveling along around one proton, around another proton, around another proton, around another proton. And when we see electricity flow in systems, it's usually because there is something that is the conduit for it. In other words, there has to be a bunch of protons that those PSU can get accelerated around and pulled down the pipe, right? And so that gives us a little bit deeper sense of the practical application of what electricity is, as we understand the PSU and ways to interact with PSU, which right now we know some of the simple methods of doing that, which are just basically electric theory. There's so much to be explored and discovered, though, because if we build structures that, let's say, help contain and or increase the flow of PSU in different ways that are more aligned with the way space-time builds itself, i.e. the 64 tetrahedral matrix, i.e. the geodesics of the proton, et cetera, we become much, much more efficient with how we actually work with PSU and thus with electricity, which unlocks a lot of technological potential. Now, the magnetic field, I would say, is actually just the result of the way that the PSU are moving through the field, is actually has an effect, a waveform interaction with the surrounding field as well. So if you've got a bunch of PSU that are co-moving within a wire and you start spinning that wire around, the PSU are not all going to necessarily be isolated to sticking inside that wire. And there is, because it's space-time itself that's moving, it creates a co-moving ripple that begins to influence the PSU and the movement of the field around that wire as well. And the movement of the sort of secondary motion of that field is what I'd say we are calling generally the magnetic field. And it's probably not the reason why it's not as strong, but there's a direct interplay, is that if you can enhance the movement of the magnetic field, thus the electrical field increases. If you enhance the movement in the electrical field, the magnetic field increases, because the two layers of motion are all in interaction through the fundamental entanglement of spacetime itself, through the tensegrity of spacetime. Does that help, Zed? Oh, don't think we have.
Yeah, I was on mute. Sorry, as always. Yeah, that's a great explanation. I mean, my curiosity is in how this all fits together in a holistic way. So trying to understand. So a point of entry is try to understand something. So magnetism has always been a fascinating thing, right? You've played with magnets when you were a child, yeah. and electricity, and then obviously that leads to trying to look at how the current establishment, if you want to call it that, explains it, and they explain it in a nonsensical way as far as I was concerned, because there's no integration of information to understand something. It's all understood in terms of isolated pieces of information. So it's explained in a snapshot, if you like. So anyway, point I'm getting at is that I think with what Nassim and what you guys are bringing to the table is this new holistic paradigm, if you want to call it that. So it's still not clear to me how magnetism works in the model that I've understood it, but I think your explanation is bringing a new perspective to it. So it's not this ball of electrons moving through a wire that runs as electricity. It's more like maybe a field, a wave that's being generated. And to go back to Dr. Iris, what she was saying about, at what point does the state change and it becomes mass? So all of that is very interesting, and then it's all tied up with consciousness, and it's all tied up with how do I live this life with a changing paradigm against an established order that won't let me operate in the way that you guys have found a way to operate because of your cutting edge ideas and being able to form that group. So as a human being, as a working person, I'm confronted all the time with a certain level of understanding which gets blocked because I have to operate in an old paradigm, if you want to call that, in an old world view, in order to make money, in order to pay taxes, which I don't want to do, in order to operate in this society. And then I see all this stuff that's going on. And my biggest problem is, how do I access it? How does it change my life? How can I make it work for me? That's a conundrum. Which
you're in the right place, Zed.
That's
you're
right.
in the right place with us. And I'll just add one little piece of additional understanding, because I think it will link to some of what Inez was talking about earlier too, is that remember that each of the Planck oscillations, each of the oscillations in space-time also has polarity. And because of that, you're also dealing with the sort of additional effect of polarization in that moving wave field. And the effect of that polarization in that moving wave field is going to influence other PSU that are outside of that zone, so to speak, right? Because there's a level of effect of that energetic movement, sort of, it's fascinating, because when you're talking about a PSU, you're talking about this like fundamental field of light that the entire universe is made of. Right. And so everything we're talking about becomes that, right? And that is moving, that's spinning, that has polarity, that has a co-moving waveform, and that, but the co-moving of that field is influencing everything that field is connected to, because they're all interconnected. They're not separated. There's no dividing factor, between the PSU flowing around the protons in the metal of the wire and the insulator, and that has its PSU that are flowing a different way, that are holding back some of that polarity, but then another amount of that charge or that tensegrity field is affecting the surrounding space too. And thus we have a magnetic effect, or in the flow of the PSU within a magnet, we're seeing the actual pull of the charge field influencing the other PSU around that structure.
Yeah, if you take the old physics teaching of iron filings and a magnet, and then trying to prove something by say, well, this is how it works, but it doesn't actually work that way. It's not representing it correctly when they explain that visual, and I think that's the paradigm shift. It's being able to present your ideas in a way that resonates, hence resonance foundation, at the conscious level. So, that's what I found. It's like intuitively, I was drawn to what Nassim was saying. I had no physics. I'm not a mathematician, right? I'm actually a business analyst in IT, right? Working on kind of like, making business run more efficiently through whatever. It's all nonsense, actually, at the end of the day, right? Because the objective is incorrect. The end goal is not really something that resonates with me. But I have to make a living. So the way you guys describe things and the way Nassim described it and your visuals that you're using, that's what resonates with me on a conscious level. My problem has always been, how do I ride this wave? How do I get to connect with the Godhead? And before people start pinging me, I know there are hundreds of different ways of doing it. And I have to start by doing it myself. And I can't depend on anybody to tell me how to do it, but it is a conundrum, right? And I think it's a lot of people are in the same situation as to how do you kickstart this whole process that will change you. Anyway, I've got, thank you. I've got to go to a meeting and discuss banking fraud. But anyway,
I have a legal meeting here I got to get over to as well. So back to the default world where we do our best to apply the fundamental truth of the universe to the mundane.
Phase transition of paradigms is what
that's right. I'll try and bring that into the conversation. Say, hey guys, you can solve all your anti-money laundering problems by just spinning.
Believe me, they do spin. They're very good at spin.
Exactly. Okay, well, thank you very much, guys.
Thanks,
I
Ed.
really do appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me today, and thanks for giving me so much time to just blab and talk and share my thoughts on things. And love you guys, and thank you for doing such amazing work, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Back at you, and rock it out there in Sedona with the crew, and get that health sovereignty. That's the paradigm we're living in.
Yes.
And bring it into the world. So appreciate it, Adam. Thanks for being here. Take good care.
Aloha, team.
Aloha.
Bye, Adam.
Bye.
Great stuff. Wow, what a dynamic first hour of conversation. I think it'd be good to bring William in a little bit more, and Jamie as well.
Yeah.
So, whatever you guys, if you've been looking at some questions,
go ahead, William,
to bring up. Let's continue on.
So Nadi Hana was asking if we can pick up on a conversation we were having in last month's Q&A session. And so this is on the engineering of the human genome by an extraterrestrial intelligent civilization, and what potential evidence there could be for this. She starts off the question with irreducible complexity. Hi, Nadi. As evidence for the intelligent design of the human DNA. And so this is actually, I think, a really great place to start to frame this question, because, the question of, is it possible that human beings, or really any other organism on Earth, could have been had their genomes manipulated or engineered by a intelligent civilization from another star system is totally within the realm of possibility. When you, especially as more and more evidence mounts on the number of habitable planets in the galaxy, a rough estimate is something like 40 billion. The length of time that there has been hospitable conditions for life to develop, which is around 10 billion years. So, I mean, talking about 40 billion opportunities over 10 billion years. And more and more, that Drake equation starts to add up where the possibility, the potential for other intelligent beings that develop complex societies and civilizations being in other places in the galaxy, the probabilities are pretty good in its favor. So it is not a inane question to say, well, what if they developed advanced enough to travel interstellar distances, go to other worlds and tinker, experiment with the observe, study the organisms they find on those planets. And actually, when talking about, when considering the origin of life on Earth, most scientists in the 19th century purported the idea of panspermia, which is that life came to Earth, was seeded on Earth from outer space. And actually this, it was developed even further by one of the fathers of molecular biology, Dr. Crick, who published a paper on directed panspermia, which is the idea that life was seeded on Earth by an intelligent civilization intentionally. So this is a legitimate scientific question to consider. And then, of course, we have some evidence for this. And what we're going to look for is a molecular technosignature. When we're talking about evidence of other intelligent beings in the galaxy, in the universe, we often talk about technosignatures. Can we find technosignatures on the surface of Mars, on the surface of the moon, in our genome? Now, on the question though of irreducible complexity, that's actually an argument that's put forward by creationists that are propounding creationism. And, these two ideas I see oftentimes get conflated. The question of extraterrestrial intelligent civilizations having a hand in the creation of humanity and a supreme supernatural being that just popped everything into existence. And that's really where the idea of the argument of irreducible complexity comes in, is that you had a supernatural supreme being outside of the universe who could just snap their fingers and humans would be there, fully formed. And it's an argument against evolution. Now, for me, intelligent design by another intelligent civilization is not an argument against evolution, because those are natural organisms that at some point had to emerge ostensibly by natural evolutionary processes. The idea of a extraterrestrial intelligent civilization having a hand in the genesis of humanity, in terms of me, I frame it in a scientific context in which we're not making an argument against evolution, because for me, evolution is another word for things changing over time, and I see no legitimate argument against that. For me, it's pretty self-evident that things change over time, and that's evolution. When we're talking about engineering by an intelligent extraterrestrial civilization, I don't see any cases of irreducible complexity being strong evidence for that. Mainly just because I've never come across a good example of irreducible complexity in the biological system. Now, I have in my studies come across what looks to me like molecular technosignature, which is part of the biochemistry, part of the biology that does look to be not naturally occurring, i.e. having been brought along by some kind of intentional, intelligent, directed behavior. And, in all of these instances, it's kind of elusive in coming to a conclusion, kind of like the presence of extraterrestrial civilizations is. It's like there's lots of pretty good evidence that they're here, they've been here, but it's hard to come forward with that concrete, irrefutable proof that would make it so that that's just widely accepted. So even in the molecular technosignatures that I've identified and discussed, while I see them as strong evidence for genetic engineering of the human species, it's not entirely impossible that they could have occurred via a naturalistic evolutionary process. So it's something that is a bit elusive, just like the extraterrestrial presence is.
Right. Well, it's that illusory aspect of it that I wanted to ask. It is so good to see you guys. I love you all so much. I have to start off by saying that. And my coverage is pretty bad, so I might be a little blurry. But last time, am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, awesome. I love you guys so much. So molecular technosignature just works so much better. My best way of talking about it was irreducible complexity. So that's really cool to shift language around that, because I come at this from the assumption that they're here from the ET human hybridization program. And that's really my reality. And looking at this, in the larger picture of the greater evolution of humanity, right? And so I have this curiosity around the term that's really thrown around in our community of activation, right? And DNA activation. And then, trying to get at like what exactly is being activated when we're talking about the interdimensional and holographic nature of DNA, right? That just turns me on. And so, okay, so I'm going to calm down a little bit. So last time we talked about horizontal gene transfer and the change in the RNA transcript. I took really good notes. And then the ALU DNA, right? All sorts of fascinating stuff. And then just for giggles, I also wrote down Alien Jazz Cafe. And I'm not quite sure if we talked about that. So all of this is to say, is it the ALU DNA? Do we know, are we getting a sense of what exactly is being activated?
Yeah. So, well, I have, So, when you look at the ALU retrotransposable element, it is has the largest gene copy number in the human genome. So there's over 1 million copies of this genetic element throughout all the chromosomes of the human genome. So actually, if you were to break down the human genome in terms of percentages, the ALU retrotransposable element comprises about, it makes up about 10% of the entire human genome. That is a significant amount of this a little regulatory modulatory gene element that's active in the human genome. So it belongs to a larger class of mobile genetic elements, transposable and retrotransposable elements, which make up in upwards of 40% of the human genome. And then you have another 50%, which is very pertinent when you're talking about the holographic nature of the DNA, the let's say non-linear nature of the DNA, and this has to do with the repeating tandem elements. These have quite a bit of different names. They're also called satellite regions, microsatellite regions, because they're often found flanking protein coding gene segments. So like little satellites orbiting these regions. So microsatellite regions. And why would they be there? Because they are regulating, modulating the expression of that gene, changing what is being expressed from that protein coding gene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Okay.
Yeah. So now, yeah, if I were going to tweak the genome of a species, I would probably use the ALU element. Because one of the reasons that you don't have, I think, this like punctuated intervention that is like clearly definable is that our biology and the way that we are evolving is linked into a natural process that is hyper intelligent already.
Yes.
So like the question of would humans have emerged naturally? I believe the answer would be yes. I mean, without any kind of intervention or let's say engineering manipulation.
Really? All right.
Yeah, because and this is related to work that me, Nassim, and Dr. Amir Val-Baker have done with the Unified Space Memory Network. We're essentially describing biological function, dynamic evolution, and sentience as being the result of coupling with this intelligent field, the unified field, and the information exchange processes and memory functions of that field. So we're already tapped into a hyper intelligent source that is, in a sense, directing our evolution and change, and that we can tap into to direct and guide our evolutionary change.
Right. Like future us can come back and yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Or I mean, you can, I believe you can tap into that information exchange that's occurring with the Unified Space Memory Network and activate some of these mobile genetic elements. So, you could activate the retrotransposable elements. You can activate the tandem repeating sequences. And, this is, for me, DNA activation. These are the kind of practices that you can do to turn on the DNA, so to speak. I mean, for like, driving a higher level of awareness, a higher level of evolution. That was actually another thing we didn't get to touch on last time was the activation of like dormant gene regions. So you can have that kind of activity going on. Because within your non-coding DNA regions, which is actually the majority of the genome. So in upwards of 98% of the genome is not conventional protein coding genes, you have a lot of dormant gene sequences.
Right.
They are defunct or genes that have been essentially turned off. And actually, there was a study that was done that showed a clear example of one of these genes being turned on. And in this case, it was a study that was done in elephants. It was in the elephant genome where this long dormant gene was activated, turned on, and they found that it was functioning in cancer suppression in this group of elephants. So, these kind of things do happen and can happen. And one of the way that these genes are turned on is by chromatin remodeling. Genomic remodeling. And so you can have epigenetic remodeling taking place, which is removing certain regulatory elements from the genome that silence a gene region. One of the more interesting case scenarios is with things like the ALU retrotransposable element or mobile genetic elements. You can have somatic cell nuclear recombination. So that is recombination of the genome of adult human cells.
Okay, I've just reached my saturation point. I can't track all the questions I have. Okay, can I just jump in for clarification though?
Yes, please.
So the turning off and the turning on, right? And we've got a herd of elephants. Awesome. And this is where our potential, like accessing the memory, the fields, space memory. It's a chicken and egg question, isn't it? Of like, if our genes were turned off, we don't necessarily have the skill set to activate them, right? Which is, I don't know if I'm understanding that correctly, but I know that we have the capacity, and this is part of our evolutionary process, is we activate each other through, an energetic transmission, right? So the turned off, turned on, and how we turn them on. And, a lot of us know how to turn them on, but a lot of us don't. And so I think that's the piece of information. That's the core of my question. I don't know if I'm honing in on something that's, fascinating in the world of genetics, but I'm looking for the bridge between the biology, what we're turning on, and then the consciousness piece and what we're turning on as well.
Yeah. If I understand your question correctly,
I don't understand my question correctly.
I would just say that when you get down into the molecular level of the biochemistry of the cell, when I look at that and study what's going on, I mean, to me, in a lot of respects, it looks more intelligent than myself. The things that my cells are doing are more intelligent than things I can think of to do and how to do them. So you kind of you have a body intelligence, a cellular and molecular intelligence that's operating within you that again is hyper intelligent.
Right.
It's kind of oftentimes stunning to see the amazing things that our cells and macromolecular structures are doing with us completely oblivious to it. They're doing it millions of times a day to keep us happy, keep us moving along, right?
We're miracles. We're absolute miracles.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, undoubtedly. And so, for me, the way to facilitate this is just to set up a maximum coherent state to let it operate optimally at its maximum potential. And to do that, it's fairly straightforward. It's increasing the coherent coupling of the system to the morphogenic field, the morphic field. you've got these layers of intelligence that you're made of. And oftentimes, I don't know, the tip of the level, which is our kind of self-awareness, is maybe the less intelligent of the other layers. But
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
It's sort of a frame of reference consideration again. It's like, we're here operating at a certain scale of complexity, which is actually highly complex and takes a huge amount of intelligence to operate within. And yet then you go into the other scales you're mentioning, and the complexity and the dynamics even go up from there. And if we were to try to incorporate that level of intelligence into our awareness, we'd reach the point where Nani just reached pretty quickly. Overload.
Right. Doesn't that suggest like the advanced intervention? I mean, this stuff is so highly intelligent, and it's, it's the study of it's just fascinating for me to look at that intelligence, look at the scale, and this just really added another level for my my research, so to speak.
And that just kind of I think brings me to the point that I was getting to, is just that I think that intelligent advanced civilization would just tap into that hyper intelligent dynamic information processes that are occurring at the cellular, molecular, atomic, and Planckian structure. Just tap into it, and then if you want a certain outcome, make the initial order parameters such that when you put it in there, it executes it, and in that way, it is following like a naturalistic process. You're kind of going with the current in that way, and that makes it a little bit difficult to like conclusively say, oh, that wasn't natural, because it could occur naturally within that hyper intelligent evolutionary system. But nevertheless, I think that there is good evidence for the molecular technosignatures, particularly with the ALU retrotransposable element. Just a few characteristics of it is that it has this linker sequence, which is a polyadenosine linker sequence, which is a line of adenosine nucleosides that link up the two functional domains to give it a new function. In molecular biology practice, that's often done in the lab to create like a fusion protein, a fusion construct. And that's how you actually create novel biomolecules for study, for changing the properties of a cell, or studying how a cell is doing certain processes. Now, as well, the ALU retrotransposable elements regulates every step of the information processing cascade of the cellular machine. So it inserts into gene regions, promoter regions, splicing regions to change a gene. So it can insert in to create an entirely new gene. It regulates the RNA level transcription. So it can actually go in and change RNA transcripts so that a gene is saying, I want to make this protein. It comes in, changes it, and it makes a different protein. So that's the code, the translation system, transcription system, and then it jumps into the translation system also. It can bind to the ribosome. And say like stall the translation of the RNA transcript into a protein. This will cause the protein to fold differently. You get a new gene product. It can change. There's translocation signals on the proteins that tell them where to go in the cell. It can change where that protein is going in the cell. So every step of the way, it can exert this influence And the question for me was always, well, how would you engineer to do that in an intelligent way in this the extreme complexity of the cellular system? And I think that it's just allowing it to couple and tap into that unified space memory network field where the information exchange is occurring, and you get this intelligent deviation in the behavior of the cellular system, and hence the macroscopic organism.
Sounds like we should probably leave it there.
Okay.
Can I have one closing summary here?
Sure.
Okay. So thank you so much, William. Those are like super gems. And what I love about all of that, as well as everything, Nassim's work, everything at RSF, is I feel like I can understand it. It takes all of my brain power, but I can't repeat it, can't quite articulate it. But I know the assimilation of information is really happening, and the details are amazing. And thank you. And what I love is that it always comes back to coherence. It always, this is the way to access all of this intelligence, right? So much of it is nonlinear that I can sit here and, try to track everything that the ALU gene is capable of, shifting, which is where I would focus if I was either an advanced, civilization, or perhaps a not so great level of human civilization. But this really, it just rounds out the package. This is exactly what I was looking for. And I'll just really, be integrating the information. And I love you guys so much. Marshall, dude, hey.
Yay. Beautiful to see you.
I would a little thing. Sorry, can I jump in?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so maybe about the activation. I don't know why, while what William was talking about, I just thought about sound. For some reason, I think that you can activate through sound. So it's just understanding which sounds are the ones that are activating, because of course our unconscious and subconscious self works through sounds. We don't realize it that much, but mostly guided by sound all the time. So then I guess that's another way of, you can tap into the discordant field, or if sounds are, like, for instance, I know that the experience they had in Egypt when they went to the pyramids. William, I think you were there. Sure. Then apparently there's some things that happened, some very powerful activations because of the place you were, the sounds that were, let's say, created or emitted, or yeah. So these places, these sacred places, which were basically technologies, were working basically with frequencies and sounds. So very probably that's something that these sacred would allow you to have. No, so it's something very probably many people got activated in these pyramids. Yeah. So
you can actually see in the cell and at the molecular level where acoustic signaling plays a very important role. When you have mechanical waves, solitons, all kinds of acoustic oscillations that are integral to the communication and information processing of the cell. Right. So, absolutely.
And the nervous system.
Yeah, the nervous system.
Nervous system too. It's not just electrical; it's acoustical as well.
Yeah.
And then that makes it not strictly a physical network communication, but also a more non-locally distributed,
like a waveform, holographic waveform.
Throughout the entire field of the cellular structure.
No, they've found that with every electrochemical potential that you have, like going along a nerve cell, it's actually front run by a acoustic wave. So you have the electrical signal traveling down, and there's an acoustic wave going ahead of it. Sound, and that's just one example of sound in the central nervous system.
Well, Nadia, that was a very powerful, profound conversation all around. Thanks for bringing a follow-up.
Thank you so much, Nadia.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
It was good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay, be well.
Bye. You too.
Jamie.
How's it going?
Good, good. Wow. So rich and deep. Love it. So yeah, Jamie, do you want to jump in on something?
Sure. Jeff Colebrook always asks great questions. He asked, how has the study and sharing of unified science, especially the recent connections emerging, affected your daily spiritual awareness of a connection to source, love, enlightenment, and humility? And I love these abstract kind of questions because that's a fundamental for every human. Like, why do I need to try to understand anything? Why would I even want to ask these questions? Why do I care about physics or science or numbers or geometry or any of this stuff? Like, should I even be asking these questions? And then what happens? Hey, Jeff, how you doing? And then what happens is, for me, I think as everybody who's growing up as a kid, you're asking these questions. Your parents don't always have a great answer for you. Your teachers don't always have a great answer for you. Then you find some scientists, you try to ask them questions. Maybe you come across some sort of philosophy and some sort of guru or an ascended master or a religion. And they have all these versions of this information, and it's confusing because they're not all matching, right? And then you find this one set of information that really points in the same direction from all different angles. Like, no matter what perspective you're looking at this thing, it all starts to connect. And the one thing that exists is space. Really, if it comes down to it, if you said to Nassim, what's the universe doing? What's the one thing? He would say, there's only one thing, and it's this field, and it's spinning. And the field is space, and space is spinning at different scales. And if it's a big spin, you might call it a galaxy. If it's a small spin, you might call it a proton. And then you ask the questions of like, well, how does this affect me? Like, what would happen if I understood everything there is to know about the one thing? And so you can ask questions like, what's the study of the structure of the one thing? The study of the structure of the space, which is the one thing, is called geometry. So that's pretty handy, right? Geometry is telling you the structure of the one thing. And then the spin, what is that? It's dynamics. It's right. You can call it many different things, right? Fluid dynamics or plasma dynamics or space-time spin or whatever, the Planck fields, the smoothie universe, call it whatever you want. The space is spinning. So I remember being told by friends or spiritual people that were in touch with, ascended master type people that, oh, you should try this thing called meditation. You should try closing your eyes and sitting up straight. And I'm like, okay. And then they're like, yeah, maybe like cross your legs, right? So here, so like you've seen people sit like this a lot, right? They cross their legs, they put their hands onto their knees, and they sit up straight. And people tell you like, you're supposed to do it like this, you're supposed to breathe. And so wait, what shape am I making if I sit like that? And some people might say a triangle, but really you're making a tetrahedron. You're making sort of a pyramid. Pyramids have 4 sides, tetrahedrons have 3 sides, but you kind of are making yourself into a triangle on all sides as best as you can. So that, as you probably know, is foundational to the geometry of space-time, right? The theorized geometry of the fabric of the vacuum is an infinite tetrahedral array that forms perfect balanced geometries at specific intervals, the cube octahedron, the vector equilibrium. So you're aligning yourself physically, your body, with the geometry of space-time. And then what do they tell you to do? They tell you to breathe, which is sort of like everything in the universe that spins is actually a black hole centered by stillness, because you can't have spin unless you're spinning around something, and what you're spinning around is stillness. That's the point of singularity. So the ascended masters might say, point your attention into the stillness in the center of your heart, where you might hear of this thing called the Bindu point, or the heart chakra, or there's all these different names for this. But they were naming this before physics was invented. So now we have a new name for this that is in alignment with physics and science, that you might say, actually, you're checking in with the stillness in the center of your own existence. Maybe you are acting like a black hole, and you have information crossing your event horizon going in and crossing the event horizon going out. Something like, and then you're, oh, that's why all those ascended masters were telling me to do that. They're actually just saying, align your physical body with the structure of space-time and the one thing that exists, and then act like the dynamics of all things at all scales, and have information cross in and out across your event horizon. And while you're at it, it might help to get your field to spin. You don't run around in a circle as fast as you can in your mind's eye to get that thing to spin. Just like an ice skater, right? If you want to spin really fast, you have to get as small as possible towards the center. If you bring your arms in when you're ice skating, right, you spin faster. So you do that with your senses. You pull all your senses into the center too, which might involve closing your eyes, right? And like thinking about your center, thinking about a toroidal vortex spinning towards singularity. It's kind of like the vortex that goes through your crown chakra until you get to your bindu point in the center of your heart chakra, and then it expands out. Just like Adam was talking about the spin of the proton at the speed of light, you're spinning faster at the equator too. So you imagine the energy coming in and then it goes back out. And guess what? It's doing the opposite spin from the bottom. It's coming from the top and the bottom. Equal and opposite spin, and then it goes out. That's the dual torus. And you're doing that whether you want to or not, whether you're aware of it or not, because it's just what's happening in the universe. And you're part of it because you're fractally embedded into the structure of space-time. So instead of telling kids, you're this practically infinitely small little blob of cells floating around on this one little rock that's going around this one little star, one of 300 billion stars in this one little galaxy that's all in this cluster of galaxies called Laniakea. You're so small, doesn't really matter what you do. When it's really, you're actually medium-sized. You're halfway in size from the smallest thing we can measure to the biggest thing we measure, and you're fractally embedded in this holographic structure, and anything big that needs to communicate with the small has to communicate through your scale, and vice versa. Anything small at the Planck scale that needs to make the big stuff, because the big stuff's made of the small stuff, has to go through your scale as well. So you're actually in a really nice position. You're medium-sized. You're an infinite being inside of an infinite structure, not some insignificant blob of plasma. And so if you tell the kids that from early on, instead of what I got in school, which is, oh yeah, you're probably pretty insignificant, I feel like you could really transform society by just telling kids basic information about your relationship of what you are and what you do compared to the thing you're in. So yeah, it actually can really, really change a kid's life just by giving them this download at the right time, right when they're ready to hear it. And then they walk around like, yeah, I thought I was Superman, or I thought I was Wonder Woman, or whatever they identify with as a superhero, because we basically are. We are God, and we've been told that we're not. And Buddha always would tell everybody, you know, I'm the Buddha and everybody's the Buddha. And then the followers are like, what are you talking about? You're the Buddha and we're not the Buddha. What makes you Buddha and we're not Buddha? Nassim loves this story. He tells it all the time. So the only difference is that Buddha knows he's the Buddha. And if you don't know that you're the Buddha, then you're not the Buddha. So I'm just trying to remind you what Nassim reminds me to say about what Buddha was trying to remind us, right? Which is one of these ascended masters that were basically telling us the deal before the invention of physics. So that's my translation of all that. And as a non-physicist myself, trying to figure this out, like the rest of us, you know.
I do ask good questions. I mean,
yes.
if I can draw that out of Jamie, that was a good question.
Jeff is on these calls almost every week, I would say, and he asks such good questions that our contributing members upvote.
Because you have the good answers. You got the good answers. I have to come up with that. And so yeah, anybody else want to answer that question? I'd be delighted, especially the same question Jamie answered.
I know Marshall's got something on this, and Marshall's always like the host, and he never really calls on himself.
Yeah,
so
I'd love to hear what Marshall has to say.
Because Marshall, of course, you guys, has an entire book called Cosmometry and a website.
Best book in the world, the best book in the world.
And he's gone deep into stuff like this. So let's let Marshall riff on that one.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind, Jeff, give me a one sentence. What's the question, so I can make sure I'm answering from the proper place.
Read it. Do you want to read it, Jamie? Or
I was just trying to find it just now. I can see it.
Oh, did they take it off?
Yeah. Oh, did we already? No, he's saying, how is the study and sharing of unified science, especially resonant connections, emerging affect the recent emerging connections. How does that affect your daily spiritual awareness of a connection to source, love, enlightenment, and humility?
Yeah, beautiful. So great. I'll touch on this, and then I wanted to address one other question as well. So yeah, for me, I think the most significant aspect of how does this basically bridge from the knowledge and understanding into a spiritual experience, we might say. I think the importance of the unified physics, the unified science, this model of understanding, because it is unifying, it's doing so in a logical framework. And so that logical framework is something that we can all talk about here, and we can take that framework and apply it into different directions and different understandings, different conversations, different fields. And the beauty of that is, being a logical framework, it enables our minds, which have tended to be very confused, especially in relationship to spiritual matters, because the mind has a hard time making the leap into something transcendent in and of itself. And because the mind is a very linear, analytical, logically operating aspect of our consciousness experience, it prior to having a framework of unification, I think we've tended to be very confused, and I think we see that actually in a lot in our world because of that. The paradigm that we are referring to as falling away is based on the limitations of understanding that then lead to where the mind gets very confused, because it gets very abstract when you start to going into theories that are really not grounded in, the nature of what we've been discussing here. But when you do that, you bring it in, then the mind can finally basically show up to the party and say, yeah, I get it. This is cool. I'm part of this. I'm actually integrally involved, and it's exciting and it's fulfilling. And it actually becomes then part of the spiritual experience, not feeling it's separate from it. And to me, that's, I think, really one of the most profound aspects of the theory and the nature of the shift of the paradigm, because it's not just an intellectual paradigm shift, it's that full unification of the mind and the physical, daily, logistical, living, analyzing, analytical aspect, and the transcendent, experiential, spiritual aspect, as we call it, which are really all one and the same thing. So yeah, that's what I would quickly kind of expand on what Jamie shared about that whole inquiry.
So what you're saying, unified physics tricks your mind into becoming enlightened?
It's no trick. It's not even a trick. It's actually just the fulfillment.
Yeah,
it's the fulfillment. Exactly. It's the logical realization that we are already that. We are innately that. And it just allows the mind to actually see it and understand it, and be able to talk about it and be participate in it, really, in a way that also allows the mind to release the aspects that are questioning and doubting and confused. Those get to clear away as well. And that's another part of that we literally are lightening the load, so we're enlightening ourselves, you could say. So
well, I'm just so grateful. I mean, to be here with everybody. So thank you very, very much for answering that beautiful question. Or if William or Inez wants to go for that too, but
I'd like to just.
I have to say something.
Yeah, take a little bit.
Yeah, because for me, it's been more like a challenge, like in the sense that it places the responsibility on me. Like I have no more excuse, like saying, "Oh, I'm a victim. This is not possible," because it's like, and that's the challenging part. Because, like for instance, I come from mainstream, so this holistic, oh, I want to do unified physics and I want to share it with all my community and all that. It's not so easy in my case. It's like I am in this zone of resistance because of my background in physics and in standard physics, let's say like conventional modern physics. And so it becomes a real challenging situation for us, the ones supporting from this side of the event horizon. And so it's like, so of course it's like it's challenging. At the same time, it really gets rid of the naive part of everything. Like you cannot victimize, but you cannot also be naive about it. You have to really take responsibility for everything that's happening around you. So if you're in a zone of conflict, or if you're having some problem in your relationship or in your work or whatever, you have to understand from where is it that you're contributing to that problem. So that's also part of the holographic solution, the holographic theory. When you put it in practice, it's not all is love and peace and love and understand much deeper layers to it, to that. And that has been my experience all along, because before I was in a very rough situation in my life when I jumped into the theory of Nassim's theory. So it was like a prelude of what was coming. Like it was, so you know, it's and there's also this notion of resonance, which is very important, not only in our foundation, but in resonance is what makes us what makes life possible. The resonance, that there's coincidences in synchronicities and resonances, and that's what makes it happen. So understanding what aspects of the reality are coming from your resonance and which ones are not, and all of that, it's a very huge deep understanding and insightful, meaningful experience. So that really brings it together, because you become a creator. You understand your responsibility in co-creating this reality, and it doesn't even matter in what size you want to place yourself in. It's just like you have to be responsible for your co-creation, and that's just way beyond whatever other physics I had seen before. And yeah, so that would be my feedback about it. Yeah.
Thank you. This is I just feel so lucky to be among you guys. So thank you, and blessings to every one of you. Blessing on Ed.
Yes, I don't know. Yes, I think you had one question about the Muon. Is that your question about the Muon?
Muon. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I just can jump in a little, because I erased, when I popped out of the call, I erased all my questions, so I don't have them. So just very fast. You were asking about so the Muon. So yeah, that's a very interesting thing that happened because of so can you read the question? Because I don't know.
Let me see if I can get. Let me see if I can get to it. It's gone too. I don't know why. Here, let me see if I can find it somewhere real quick.
Well, it had to do with this particle, which is a cause of the electron, the Muon. And so it's a much heavier version of the electron. It's 200 times heavier than the electron, but it should be like an electron, just heavier. So the thing is that
I've got the question if you want me to read it.
Yeah, go ahead. Read it.
This came from the National Geographic. New experiment hints at a particle breaks the known, quote, laws of physics. A heavier sibling of the electron known as the muon is changing the standard model of all the particles in the universe. In a landmark experiment, scientists have found fresh evidence that a subatomic particle is disobeying one of the science's most watertight theories, the standard model of particle physics. The gap between the model's prediction and the particle's newly measured behavior hints at the universe may contain uncertain principles and forces beyond our current grasp. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, sure I would. Yes. Okay, so here's the thing. So we have this measurement of the muon. This has been a very complicated measurement. It's taken 30, 40 years, 20 years ago. So there's a standard model having its prediction for its this property in particular is the magnetic moment. So you have this this magnetic moment which is predicted by theory, and then you have the experiments. 20 years ago, the prediction was done in, I think it was in the Large Electron Positron Collider, and it had the measurements were made for this, and they found it was in disagreement with a discrepancy of 2.7 sigma. That's just a value which is really far from the experimental, let's say. So the theoretical value was not in the good position. So that was a large discrepancy. So that was 20 years ago. So of course, you know, the standard model has developed further. It's got enhanced. It's got new features. It's much robust. And also the experiments have become much more precise, much better. And so they decide, so then there comes again the experiments. Now this is very, very close this year, I think, or last year recently. And they do the experiments again, this time in Fermilab. And what they find, so they were expecting something closer to the standard model prediction, you know, like, we've got a better measurement, so now it's closer, and boom, no, it's got almost twice the discrepancy. It's now 4.5, I don't know, it's above 4. So they were like, no way. So now this is even worse. It's similar to what happened with the Proton, where Proton is a huge deal already because they were in real good, there was no discrepancy before. When there was the theoretical value and the measured value, there was no discrepancy, but new experiments, which were much better in precision, gave later this discrepancy that Nassim predicted, you know, that was a few years ago. And now the problem, so the standard model says, okay, we have solved the problem of the Proton because we have removed terms we had, and now we have the correct value. Well, okay, now the standard model is predicting correctly, let's say, the value of the Proton, but because we moved some things they had previously implemented in order to have the value that they had before. Well, okay, so no worries. Okay, they predict a value apparently, although they have to use 7 parameters of adjusting parameters, and I don't know how many things in that model, while Nassim get it straight ahead just using tree and algebra. Well, okay. So now they go into the problem of the Muon, because that's a new problem they have to tap into to solve the standard model, to give legitimacy to the standard model. And the problem is that they do these experiments, and what they find is that, woof, the discrepancy has grown almost the double, has doubled almost. So Jesus, now what are we going to do? So now the problem is exactly that. The problem is that now the standard model is off by more than 4 standard deviations, and that means that either there are new forces playing a role, either new particles and new interactions concerned, or the standard model is incorrect. And or incomplete or incorrect. And this is where Nassim's theory is coming strongly to predict the correct value for the magnetic moment of the Muon. Yeah, this is something that's going to happen in the next paper. That will be also explained in the next paper, but this is one of the many things that the model can predict. It can predict all the constants of physics, all of them, and it will predict the values, experimental values that were not possible to predict through the standard model. So yeah, so that's the story with the Muon.
Nice.
Thank you. That
was helpful.
So lucky to be here. I don't know why more people don't take advantage of this amazing experience. I'm just so proud to be one of the people watching you do all this work. So thank you.
Thanks for your support, Jeff.
Yeah, always appreciate it. Well, I think that's a wrap for today. We had 2 hours, and that was such a rich exploration of many facets of physics and the relevance of it to our lives. And gosh, other things. I don't even remember all we covered. It was quite far-reaching and profound. So I know I myself have to jump off now and go on to some other things. I imagine we all do. So I thank William. I see William's already got something coming on his desk right now. Thank you again, William, as always. Glad you could stay.
Time to get back to work.
Yeah. Well, we love all that you share. And Jamie, always so great to have you sharing your insights and wisdom and your perspective.
Thanks for hosting, Marshall.
Rounds out the way we look at all this in a good way. And that's, as always, so insightful and informative and a deep understanding. Thank you, everybody, for being here on Zoom. Thank you to our Residence Academy members like Jeff and all of you that are here participating with us on these monthly Q&As. Also, we have the ones with Nassim, the first Wednesday of each month as well. And like Jeff said, invite more people in to join us. Just put the word out. We have a free course. You know, the cost of entry is just sitting at your computer and deep diving into it. And then we can go from there. So love to you all. Stay safe, be well, and just basically hold all of this in your heart and mind and in your body as the true paradigm of who we are and what we are bringing into this world at this time. And we're all participating in that together. That's why we do what we're doing here. So be well, everybody. Thank you so much. Aloha.
Bye, everyone.
Sprinkle, sprinkle.